I'm John Wilson, I'm the CEO at Agenta. We're a technology company that focuses on education and learning. We build, manage and operate platforms for education, for video collaboration. Externally, we prefer to work with what we feel as ethical industries. Obviously education, teaching, learning, healthcare. We feel that we can really contribute to these industries by creating exciting platforms, easy to use platforms, secure platforms that people can utilise. What we feel is one of the most important things for Scotland to boost economic growth is investing in rural areas. By investing in broadband in these local areas, we can attract more talent, we can attract more companies, and we can drastically improve the delivery of education and learning within these schools, within disparate regions within Scotland.
Hope you've all enjoyed your lunch and are ready to carry on. So this afternoon we're going to start off with a session with John Kerr and Vicky Dale, and they are looking at how MOOC effectively facilitated student transitions to an online distance learning program. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, thanks. So I'm John Kerr, the MOOC Manager and Learning Innovation Officer at the University of Glasgow.
And I'm Vicky Dale. I'm a Senior Academic and Digital Development Advisor within the Learning Enhancement and Academic Development Service. Phew, a mouthful.
So we're going to just briefly go through some of the research that we've carried out about the sort of student transition from a free MOOC to a fee-paying postgraduate certificate. Just to give you an overview of the MOOCs scene at Glasgow, we partnered with FutureLearn sort of 5 years ago, so we've been with them for quite a long time now. We've actually produced more than 25 courses since we put this slice together. We're probably closer to 30. That's about 4 or 5 in production. 300,000 plus learners enrolled into MOOCs. I know these numbers don't mean a lot, but we're still attracting sort of large numbers onto a lot of our courses. The main things that we actually try and achieve is promotion for our MSc programmes, the distance ones in particular, research output. We also use MOOCs as part of our blended on-campus provision, where we allow learners in class to take 6 weeks and take a MOOC online, and then they'll come back and do capstone assignments and so on and so forth within class. So it's sort of like a flipped teaching approach, but slightly different pedagogy behind it. Partnership collaborations, so we've started partnering with other institutions, Deakin University, for example, where we're going to co-collaborate a MOOC together in a specialist area of healthcare management. We've also done other work with other partners such as the BBC and Historic Royal Palaces. And FutureLearn becomes that platform that both partners can use, and we're not relying on someone else's piece of technology like Moodle or something that another institution may use. And we also have the generalist courses, and these are just special interests that we feel that Glasgow has expertise in, and we will push that out for the public to take. So a little bit about the project. So the course is a postgraduate certificate in art crime. It was the course leader was Dr. Donna Yates. She actually won a Best Online Learning Student Experience Award at the University of Glasgow, and the MOOC served as a precursor to the course. So it ran twice before our course, our PG Cert, went live in September. And the course that we specifically looked at attracted almost 11,000 learners, and you can see the sort of completion rates there. The standard postgraduate certificate, 60 credits, 3 courses, and we enrol 30 learners onto that. And it can actually lead into a face-to-face masters, which is within this School of Arts. The MOOC is now on its 9th run, and it still does actually really well as a standalone course. Sort of learner experience study, and Vicky's going to talk more about that in a second. And we really focused on how the MOOC supported that transition from a free course to the fee-paying course, and Vicky will go on more about the sort of themes that we looked at. So a typical screenshot of FutureLearn, which I'm pretty sure everyone is absolutely familiar with, and what we used. The screenshot on the right is from the course. The academic used that presentation software for course delivery, and she used Slack chat an awful lot. Donna found learners that the Slack chat was a great way of learners communicating, rather than using Moodle forums, the sort of the notifications, almost like a sort of WhatsApp style communication channel, and that's something that's been adopted throughout. So I'll go and pass you on to Vicky.
Thanks. So just before we go on to the learner experience research methodology, if you haven't seen the introductory video for this particular MOOC, it's your opportunity to see John in his acting debut as an antiquities thief, so that's quite interesting.
Please don't watch the video.
Okay, so we wanted to do learner experience research because we're really keen to know what about the student experience, and we wanted to know particularly the experiences of the MOOC and how that transitioned into the PG Cert. We were interested in, this was informed by the literature, how they prepared for the PG Cert in terms of their foundation knowledge, which was quite varied, their study skills, which again was quite variable, although a lot of the students were actual graduates, so they did already come in with a number of skills. The digital literacies, because obviously that's critical when you're engaging with students in the online space, and the readiness for self-directed learning. Because online distance learners, there's that issue of the loneliness, perhaps not knowing how to manage their time online, so it's really important that they are self-directed and that they're engaged and supported in that. And we also wanted to find out what else we could have done to support students as a team. And what we did was we had semi-structured interviews planned, and of the 9 participants, 7 of them were actually recorded, audio recorded, face-to-face interviews. 2 of them were filled out as interview pro formas in a written format, and that's because we had some international student participants and they felt more comfortable engaging in the study in that way. So we combined that data, and obviously we got ethical approval to gather the data from our learners at the start. So we used thematic analysis to be able to analyse the data, identify the themes, the sort of commonly occurring patterns, and what the students were telling us. So Eva Kubinkova and myself hand-coded all the transcripts. John looked at a sample of these, and then we had conversations. I think we had a couple of conversations just to tease out what we all agreed were the main themes and patterns. And the main themes were as follows on the slides, that the MOOC, as you would expect, stimulated enrolment onto the PG Cert. It enhanced their preparation for this online distance learning credit-bearing course. One of the things that came out that was critical, and I think that's a point for discussion that we really welcome later, is the importance of the lecturer. And also there were challenges and suggestions for improvement, because the MOOC can help in some ways to support the learners into this credit-bearing course, but there are still issues that we couldn't anticipate. So what we're going to show you is a series of quotes. So we're not going to read them out to you, but they are on the slides and they will be available online in SlideShare afterwards. We might just pick out some key themes, key points to highlight that. So in terms of how the MOOC stimulated enrolment for the PG Cert, it raised the students' awareness. It confirmed their motivation and interest in the topic. So one of the issues about online courses is they may start it, and then once they've already started, they've paid their fees, they find out this isn't really what they thought they were buying into, so that leads to dropout. This is a good way to alleviate that issue. Self-efficacy, so being able to study online, students felt more comfortable and more confident about that too. And then finally, recognising the value of online learning. This student had previously very bad experiences of online learning, and it was actually quite cathartic for them to realise, and empowering for them to realise, that online learning could be a good thing. It could be inclusive, it could engage the learner. Okay, is that enough time to read them? Just kind of? Okay. And then in terms of how the MOOC enhanced their preparedness for the PG Cert, we talked about foundation knowledge. So there were people on this course, we had art historians, we had archaeologists, there were people from the police force, and from international backgrounds as well. So the students all came in with it was almost like jigsaw pieces combining their knowledge together, which was a good thing, but it did mean that the MOOC provided the opportunity to align everybody, calibrate their foundation knowledge. So that was good. Digital literacies obviously prepared them for engaging in the online learning space. And then study skills. It didn't give them new study skills as such, maybe some advanced study skills as we mentioned later on, but generally it just kind of reinforced what they'd already developed. We did have some really incredible people on this course. I say I'm using the Royal Donna course, of course. But there was writers of fiction, there was a whole range of different people, an incredible bunch. Yeah, definitely. And then readiness for self-directed learning. Just give you a second to have a wee look at that. Yeah, it's a bit scary. If you don't keep up, you're going to have to pay a price for it. So I obviously learned through the MOOC that they had to manage their time effectively. And then the importance of the lecturer. So enthusiasm. Donna lives and breathes her subject. She is the best digital scholar I've ever seen online on Twitter. She has an incredible number of followers, doesn't she? She's got about 3 Twitter accounts.
She's in the tens and tens of thousands now.
Yeah, and she lives and breathes her discipline, and I think that comes across so clearly to her students, which is a wonderful learning experience. You can't put a price on that. And then very much the sort of idea of teacher presence. So Donna was there. Even though it was an online course, the MOOC was obviously online and the PG Cert leading into it was online, Donna was there, she answered questions. And the comment about support, the level of helpfulness that she brought to it. So it wasn't just that she was fielding academic questions, she was also dealing with technical issues as well. We had students who were struggling to get into the library to rent out books or get e-books, that sort of thing. And Donna was keen to engage with that. She went over and above. That was a small number of students. I don't know how sustainable that is in the long term as your student numbers grow. But she was just an incredible support to the students. And the learning design as well, and we'll say a wee bit about that shortly. That basically, the way that it was designed just made it so that students wanted to do this course.
Just to give you a bit of background, so Donna was involved in discussion forums throughout the MOOC, but we also had 2 GTA students who would also facilitate discussions, and anything that they couldn't answer was passed to Donna. So Donna would dip in, but she was there at a high level and at a more personal level with answering some of these. I couldn't give you an estimate of how much time she spent on the MOOC, but I would imagine it was maybe about an hour a day. That's probably where it should have been at, probably more, but yeah.
However, there were challenges, as we noted. So in terms of the challenges, as I said, this was an incredible bunch of students. And so we had one saying that they wanted to engage with course material beforehand. So they would have liked more academically challenging content. We talk a lot about assessment and feedback. One student or a couple of students felt that academic writing, it would have been good to have some more formative experiences within the MOOC to prepare them for what was happening in the PG Cert. But you've got to balance that with the fact that the MOOC is designed at quite a low level for generalist levels. Yeah. And then advanced study skills, so being more challenging, scrutinising sources a little bit more carefully came up. In terms of other challenges, we had some technical issues, not technical issues, but challenges in terms of students engaging with the Glasgow platform. Did you want to say a few words?
It's just that the alignment between Future Learn and your in-house VLE is quite radical because of the tools that Moodle offers and Blackboard offer compared to what Future Learn. So learners actually really just do like that very simplistic, linear view of the learning, whether within Moodle everything branches off to sort of somewhere else. So I think the struggle for us internally is how we can actually aesthetically make Moodle not look like Future Learn, but take some of those principles that learners are telling us that they like about it and then use it within our own course design.
Yep, and the trade-off with that is having the extra functionality in Moodle, of course, so it's, yeah, definitely. English is a second language, so we had international students on this course, and one student loved the chat sessions, but they participated in a different way. So they commented, but they didn't want to talk, contribute to the audio feed, because they were still building up their vocabulary and their confidence in learning in English. But they still felt fully involved. And then other people commented that in terms of online study, maybe more signposting, more explicit signposting about what they were expected to do and the time frame for that would have helped. And that's some feedback we've taken on board that we advise academics about. So we've got a paper accompanying this, and we used Garrison's Community of Inquiry model as a lens in which to present the results, because we really felt that in terms of Donna's contribution, the teaching presence was very much highlighted. The cognitive presence was very much highlighted in the learning design, and the social presence was very much highlighted by the fact that we had this course that was underpinned by a constructivist pedagogy as well. So this is Donna. She's at an ABC Learning Design workshop. That was before we got the glossy cards, so it was a bit rough and ready back in the day. But she was one of our first adopters of the ABC Learning Design method that came out of UCL. And as you can see, she looks quite happy to be using that to design her course. And I'll let you read this out. So Donna gave us permission to share her experiences with you. And I think that's what's really empowering, is the fact that when students do engage with us in terms of online learning, the MOOC and the PG Cert, it doesn't just inform their practice as an online educator, which John mentioned she won an award for, but actually informs all their learning and teaching. So that's really, really empowering. And if you want to hear more about Donna's experiences, if you haven't read about her in the papers already or follow her on Twitter, there's a talk there as well. There's also, that was our BOLD showcase event, Blended Online Learning Development Project Showcase, and Sheila did the keynote for that as well. So there's some really interesting stuff in that. Back to John.
So I'm just going to sort of recap with some of the future developments that we see at Glasgow. The next step for us is definitely a sort of MOOC strategy, whether that is a wider open educational strategy or we just go quite narrow and focus specifically on MOOCs is still to be determined. But we definitely have to set out markers of where we want to go with this in the next 3 to 5 years. It's become such an essential part of what we do at Glasgow now. It really is going to start to be embedded more mainstream into our day-to-day learning and teaching rather as a separate entity. We want to increase our output to be in line with our online degrees. So if we offer a master's or a postgraduate certificate, then a MOOC should definitely precede that for all the benefits and highlights that we've just mentioned. Within FutureLearn, our short-term focus just now is on the sort of credit-bearing programmes, where we can offer sort of short pieces of credit for learners if they take a sequence of MOOCs, for somewhere in the region of maybe 10 to 15 credits or something along that line. Again, we see that as a natural progression from a MOOC to a full postgraduate certificate or master's, and it gives them that middle ground that maybe brings some of the challenges that the learners were talking about, and it might actually help us with that going forward. And we need to look at the demand internally. It's growing. We get requests weekly for new MOOCs. They need to be aligned to sort of different strategic goals, and we need to put people in place to support this. So, you know, academic developers like Vicky, the media production development team, and so on and so forth. And the future direction, MDMF. So MDMF is a framework that has been created at Glasgow. Again, we have a paper on that as well. And effectively this builds on the UCL ABC approach, but actually takes it online and is for MOOC curriculum development. So at the left-hand side, you have a linear structure that you would expect to find on FutureLearn, where you just see everything all on the one page. You've got timings per activity, which the students picked up on, and then we've got some of the more common activities within a MOOC, so videos, articles. They get mapped out, and then at the end it all gets mapped onto the learning types, and we have a look. And as a non-subject specialist, it allows learning technologists to have that conversation with academics, look at the original course ILOs and aims, and then we can have that discussion of, well, should we have more production in this course? That was the original aim, but we've went a little bit too video heavy, which is often the case. Let's start adjusting some of these activities. And how that looks once you've had that conversation, it looks like this. It's a free tool called Real-Time Board, and it allows multiple collaborators. And the good thing about this is, as it's an enhancement and an extension to the ABC approach, with it being online, once you've had an initial meeting with an academic about their MOOC curriculum, this is online and anyone can go back in and start rejigging things and everyone sees the most up-to-date version. With the ABC approach, at the end of that session, you sort of take a picture and then you're working off of that sort of medium, and it's not ideal going forward. So I've enhanced it and we've created this framework. And this is Creative Commons licensed, and you can actually go online and get all that. If you just search for MDMF Glasgow, take it and use it, and there's all the instruction guidelines and everything else. As Vicky alluded to earlier, we have a paper on the transition work accepted by Alt Journal. We've just got the email about proofreading the final copy, so that should be done in the next day or so, and that'll be published in the Alt Journal in the coming weeks. Some references if you want to have a read, but that is us. Thank you for listening.
Okay, we still have time for questions. Anyone want to ask before I go on to Me Too to look at some of them? No? Okay, while you're thinking about it, let's just go on Me Too then. So I've got 3 questions here. The first one, how more engaged were the students when using Slack compared to FutureLearn? And was it used for text-based comments or interactive engagement?
That's a very good question.
It's a very good question. It's actually going to be quite hard to answer that because the comments on FutureLearn are in the thousands, but the quality of the comments is quite difficult. I couldn't tell you that sort of standing here. But for the 30 students that take the postgraduate certificate, they use Slack throughout the 3 courses, and Donna only reported positive highlights from it. It's the immediacy of the comments and the way they're threaded. And Moodle, it's different. It's 30 minutes a post. It's not synchronous in that respect. There is all these delays and restrictions, whereas the Slack gives you much more of a WhatsApp style mobile chat. So it's hard to actually answer that one, unfortunately.
That's fine. I hope that's helped. Next question actually is about Donna. How does she manage her time to support the MOOC? For example, does she have advertised online office hours, or is it more ad hoc?
So for the MOOC, no, there was no official rules of engagement. Effectively, we would ask academics to just give as much time as they can, and we would normally say somewhere in the region of maybe about half hour a day, but that's fronted by 2 GTAs who would help guide and facilitate discussions, and then the academic would come on for that half hour, look at the main themes and topics, and then answer them or further guide those discussions. Donna, being Donna, just couldn't tear herself away from it, so she probably spent hours on it, and then she's told me before she'd been up all hours at night, 2 in the morning, reading through comments, because it's so personal as she's built that course. It's her baby, so it's difficult for you to detach, and that, but we don't advocate that an academic spends that amount of time on a MOOC. No.
But I think just to pick up on that, Donna was, I think the fact that it was online, the course, she could be completely flexible. So as you can imagine, somebody who's just a scholar like that, she's got so many travel commitments because she's still doing all sorts of archaeological research and things as well. So I think it being online gave her that flexibility to engage with her students. And she never missed a class, and she had she like Google Live sessions and things as well, didn't she?
Yeah, Google
Hangouts.
YouTube Live sessions now,
Yeah.
Okay. One more question. I find that engaging with students online can be very time intensive. Did the students expect timely responses, or again, was it more office hours? So it's more the expectation, really, that they just expected to just get on with it and answer my question.
Yeah, I think probably Donna was successful at establishing a really good rapport with her students and engaging with them before the course, leading up to it and through that whole transition period. So I think she'd already established a rapport and a kind of protocol for what was appropriate in terms of communication. But I think that's, what you said there is really important. I think setting clear expectations for what you can do as an educator, because you can't be there 24 hours a day. They've got their own well-being is important as well. So
you don't want an academic to answer a question as soon as it's asked either, because you can then you put out the flame before it starts to burn, and
Yeah.
you want other students to that chance to collaborate or to put forward their interpretation of the direction or the answer. So usually a day or two, unless it's this is broken, I can't fix it. But if it's a general question, sometimes it's good to let that discussion happen organically before someone comes
Jumps
in. And,
in.
yeah.
Any more questions? No? Okay, I think we'll call it there then. Thank you very
Perfect.
much.
Thank you.
Okay, right, we'll move on with our next session then.
Can I just ask, you speak a bit closer to the mic?
Okay.
It's just a bit quiet. I guess you're not mic'd up.
No, we're just relying on the
Yeah.
podium mics. That's fine. Okay. Right, okay, our next session we've got Fiona Hadley, and she'll be talking about students as partners in technology initiatives. Okay. Sorry, we've started a bit early, so we might have a bit more time at the end for questions. Okay.
Thank you very much. Does that sound okay? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I think it's probably because two people before were standing a bit further back, but if I lean in, then probably you'll be able to hear me. Okay, so I'm Fiona Handley from the Centre for Learning and Teaching at the University of Brighton. And I'm here to talk about some research that I've been doing into students as partners in technology initiatives. So to really have a kind of think about what the aspects of partnership and the aspects of technology within those. So I'm going to have a quick overview of the research that I've been doing, have a look at some of the characteristics of the partnerships in those projects, look at the role of technology, and then think about a bit more about this in terms of practices as learning technologists. So I guess the bigger picture, the background to this is students as partners work and the development of these series of practices and activities and what you might call discourses around students as partners that has developed in the UK in the last 10 years, and probably at conferences like this, at events run by JISC, and in other and things like the Change Agent Network conferences and other growing organisations such as RAISE, where students as partners has become a thing. It's become something that has surfaced on university agendas. And what I'm particularly interested in is the tight relationship that the development of this idea of students as partners has had, particularly in the UK, with technology. So that's the kind of the background of my interest in this. And in particular, we come back to that idea, why is this important? Things to do with students as partners of reaching out, getting more and more attention because of this idea here that actually students as partners work can do some of that challenging of the hierarchy within education systems between students and teachers, and kind of do some of the subverting of that hierarchical relationship. So in students as partners work, there's and in the discourse around it, there's lots of like positive emphasis on the potential of this work to be really transformative, to create transformed learning communities that we're part of. The downside of that is that we're also getting caught up in the minute, at the moment really, with some critiques of students as partners, that these initiatives are being too closely aligned to what we might call kind of neoliberal discourses about the role of students in universities today. And it's kind of pitched as a counter to the role of students as consumers, that you can develop new close relationships with staff through this idea of students as partners. So what's happening is there's been a kind of real focus, a kind of bit of an energising of research into this area. And I just wanted to highlight this one paper by Mercer and Mapstone et al., who've done a really big piece of work looking at students as partners across lots of different countries, bringing together lots of different information. They're not focusing on technology, but what they were saying is basically the key things are around dialogue and negotiation. They want to make sure that when we're reporting on these projects, we're looking at the positive and the negative sides of the projects, and also that we kind of begin to explore the broadness of those projects, in particular to think about other partnerships. And this is, I guess, where my bit of work, my interest sits. So I'm not just interested in the lecturer-student relationship, but the other people, the learning technologists, the librarians, the academic developers who are involved in these partnerships. And the other destabilising element, I suppose, in this relationship, which calls on that, the things to do with technology, is the fact that when people learn about technology, they do so outside of any kind of formal curriculum. So already technology has the potential there for kind of subverting some of those roles, because there's no kind of hierarchical approach to staff, a lecturer and a student. So there's less of a power relationship there when we're talking about learning about technology. So when we bring all of this together, we can see that there is some potential within these partnership workings focusing on technology to destabilise this arena of learning. So my world then has been caught up in researching the DigiChamps, the iChamps, the partners, the ambassadors, the change agents, familiar terminology that you might have become quite used to over the last few years. So I'm looking at those kind of projects, but I'm also looking at the smaller projects that don't have the big headline names, but kind of attach onto these discussions. They too attach themselves, they kind of hook onto the students as partners umbrella. And I'm interested in seeing how they all create the way that we talk and the things that we do in these initiatives, and how they're kind of generating change as we go forward. So my research project really has got two main parts to it. So the kind of underlying background research is looking at students as technology partners, looking at 69 case studies that I've drawn from conference abstracts and papers that have been presented in the UK, that have been drawn from 51 higher education providers, so 51 universities. So I'm kind of contrasting that really with the some more detailed case studies that I've done through semi-structured interviews with participants in those schemes. So the way to kind of conceptualise that in a way is, one's the big picture, this is the official story of what's going on. On the other side, we've got the smaller detailed case studies which really reveal I guess the unspoken and the unofficial narratives of what's been going on in this area. So the desk-based research, as I said, was, I've identified 69 projects, 51 higher education providers, and out of those 69 projects, 106 pieces of dissemination, so that could be conference abstracts, that could be papers, and I've been analysing those to look for things like who's involved, who are the partners, what kind of technologies they're using, what can we say about the partnerships in those projects. Now, as that would suggest, what you can see is that what you might have is one university is producing several different case studies, and each of those case studies will be generating several different points of dissemination. So it's quite a big and complex task. And the important thing to remember here is that these are self-expressed by the participants in these projects. This is how they view their partnership working. So that's quite a key thing to remember. And in contrast, the 6 case studies, These were chosen because they represented schemes that you're probably familiar with, that have existed over a longer period of time, that are also and also include some newer schemes. And I chose them because they offered some opportunities where I could see that students were taking on new roles that might challenge this hierarchical thing. So basically kind of into teaching roles. So there were semi-structured interviews with participants, and in 4 of the schemes, several of the partners were interviewed. So let's have a look really, first of all, at that kind of who question. Who are the partners? So we're looking at the desk-based research here. So from presenting at conferences quite like this one, in fact, ALT conferences from 2014 to 2017 were part of this study. We can see that most of the kind of lead partners in these projects presenting at these kind of conferences were lecturers, actually, which surprised me somewhat, followed by learning technologists, so people like you, with the rest of that pie chart then really highlighting the range of different people who are involved in these projects. So people from employability and careers, people like me, academic developers, a kind of range of different students, including students with kind of more coordinating official roles, librarians or people who work in libraries, and then other staff, perhaps people who are specifically titled student as working in student engagement. What was also interesting, and this project really, I guess, starts to explore, is the partnerships that go beyond just a member of staff and a student to connect across perhaps different services. So what I was particularly interested in perhaps is, obviously there are lots of partners where staff and students partner together and staff within the same service, so 2 learning technologists and a student partner together. But what we find is the most typical cross-service partnership is the lecturer learning technologist student partnership. Now, interestingly, although the numbers are quite small, librarians just partner with themselves, while academic partners, like me, they'll just partner with anybody. We work with anyone. So in terms then of the dissemination, so people coming along to conferences, people doing the writing of the journal articles, you can see again the range of participants there. This would be good where I have my little thing here. Does that work? Yeah, I'm pointing at the wrong bit, that's right. Okay, so you can see the range of partners there. And obviously, given that students were partnering with all of those people, obviously they're going to be the largest section here. And we can see the types of students. So most students, we don't know whether they're undergraduate or postgraduate, but we can probably work out from this that the majority of students being involved in these projects are undergraduate students. And so this was the kind of gross totals of all of the partners. And then if we look in particular at the 106 dissemination activities, so there's points of dissemination, so it could be 100, that might be sort of 100 conference outs, perhaps 6 papers, 31, so approximately a third involve students in some way or another, which gives you an idea of the kind of the status of students within that partnership. And this is some information from the case study, the interview data. And this really is just here to highlight perhaps the complexity of some of these relationships. So these are the people that I interviewed. And already you can see in this particular case study that there's lots going on in terms of the partnerships that learning technologists were developing. And if we consider that these are the people I spoke to, as well as, and they were partnering with other people who I didn't manage to get to speak to, think of the students who were actually working in pairs on this project, the other lecturers that they were engaging with, you can begin to see that actually, there's enormous networks of partnerships going on. And if we did something else, which would be kind of to connect those projects in terms of the networks of influence between them, that would be another kind of 3-dimensional aspect to that. So the what? What kinds of activities relate to relating to technology took place. So as I was coding the abstracts and papers, I coded them basically to kind of cover as much of the variety as I could, but really they've then been sort of consolidated down into these groupings. So there's more information underneath this, but I think these groupings here work particularly well. So what we can see is that the technologies that, or the activities around technologies that were most frequent were the creation of learning resources, then the promotion or use of social media, and then the promotion or use of VLE apps and software, while consultation and research, so students working on, as consultants, as researchers, finding out about technology, was also quite common. Surprisingly, we found that device promotion, which is a little yellow slice, was actually much lower than I was perhaps expecting. While the other segment really covers the projects where students were doing loads of things. You couldn't really categorise what they were doing, and also kind of more discipline-specific activities. So just to give you an idea of the things that those activities would cover, the creation of resources would be things like creating animations, lots of things to do with assessment, and quite a lot of video, work in video. While the research was around running focus groups. Students would be running focus groups, doing hack days, looking at VLE use, and also doing things like distributing the JISC student tracker survey. And then things like VLE's app software is kind of talking about promotion there of lecture capture, Nearpod, and also supporting people in the introduction of new VLEs. Social media divided into professional social media, so I think things like Twitter and LinkedIn and other social media that we're familiar with. Particularly, the act of blogging is quite an important thing that students get involved in. So then I've tried to kind of pick down to that next level, and now we start to move to those numbers getting quite small. So these are kind of quite broad brush ideas here, but what I wanted to do was just pull out some further characteristics that might help some analysis further down the line. So what I wanted to kind of highlight really was learning technologists and lecturers typically would work in partnership to create digital learning resources. Lecturers work in partnerships with students to create learning resources or do things around social media. And student-led projects tend to focus again on social media or learning resources. Library staff tend to do things on social media. And then employability staff always do things either on professional social media or it's something that involves students creating video of themselves or doing something with video. What this doesn't highlight, what that also suggests is that research and consultation is something that everybody does, and that promotion of apps and VLEs is also something that everybody does. So I wanted to start to move towards thinking about, how can we measure the amount of partnership that's going on? And there's increasingly a number of different models that you can use which highlight this. So Boville and Bully, particularly, I think it's Catherine Boville, is a very respected writer in the field of student engagement. So this is one of her models that gets used for this activity. So at the top is basically tutors are in control, while at the bottom it's that shift to students being in control of decision making. So I did a quick piece, so I've just pulled out some highlights here to really contrast perhaps two of those different technology activities. So the creation of learning resources and the consultation or research projects, just to kind of contrast slightly the amount of participation in there. So you can see at the top of that ladder, the more yellow colour, this is where students are given a task and they complete it. While at the bottom end of that ladder, the dark red, It's where students define the project. They complete it themselves using the terms and the boundaries that they themselves have set. And what this suggests here is just from, kind of just highlighting here really some of the key points, that probably things where students are involved in doing research and consultation tend to sit towards the top of that ladder. So they're told to go off and do a task, and they do it, they consult with students. But there is a possibility that they can make that more of an enriched partnership by doing more of the deciding what they want to capture and what information they need to be able to make this as a valid piece of research. So just to flip now to thinking about, that was all from the DESPE survey, to looking at the interview data and seeing if we can find some kind of areas of overlap. So from work interviewing learning technologists, from libraries and from academic developers, so the non-academic staff, we can see that actually their main experience of partnership is a very positive one, and the positiveness of it is based on the pleasure of working with students, which I think in itself is a really interesting thing, because it's something that we don't perhaps express in professional services, is we work in education, but we don't really have that much to do with students. So finding opportunities to work with students is something we quite often quite crave. But the main, when they talk about that partnership working, what they talk about is the insights and experience that students bring as students into that partnership. It's about validating information and about bringing that student perspective. They also talk quite often about mentoring as a kind of model for partnership as well, which is interesting. From a student perspective, all the students were positive and very positive about their experiences of working with different members of staff. They see this idea of partnership as being based on equality and about being equal. And a successful partnership is one where they feel equal to staff. So students say things like, we were seen as equals and it was a partnership, so all of our ideas were valid. And academic developers and other learning technologists talk very much about this. This is what we try and instill in students. This is about equality. They also have new relationships with the students they're working with. So they have a different change in their relationship with their fellow students. But perhaps the big step change here, which is obviously really fundamental to what we're aiming for, is their change in relationship to academic members of staff. So they repeatedly, and not necessarily always when talking about technology, but they talk about this as being an extension of this confidence that you need to be able to ask a lecturer a question, to then be able to engage in a discussion about technology or about just generally. And this is how they categorise this idea of partnership. And what's really interesting is that this is definitely a threshold that students get across, because then they can see, they say things like, it was quite an odd role reversal to be teaching them about technology. It obviously became quite normal. So once you get over that threshold, it becomes obvious that, of course, I can talk to a lecturer in that particular way. So when we talk about dialogue in partnership working, I think this is a key area to look into. So the work also highlighted what we can sort of say about how this worked in terms of the technologies involved. So the most successful partnerships really were where students could either come in with lots of different ideas and take one of them forward, or have an idea, share, discuss, and be able to adapt it. But the important thing was how they went about that communication to do the choosing it and adapting. And that's those issues to do with communication, probably, that's probably key. Okay, so that's the the really positive side was the kind of the professional services lecturers, very positive feedback. Lecturing staff, I think, I should probably add that the gatekeepers to all of the projects that I ended up doing the interviews on were all professional services staff rather than lecturers. So these perhaps don't represent the lecturers who would have been presenting at places like this. So these were perhaps people who'd been brought into the project further down the line rather than initiating them. But again, this is the relationship that we're trying to challenge here, the student-lecturer relationship, or at least one of them. So I think it's fair to say that based on the interviews that I did, that generally lecturers still see the partnership working that they've been undertaking as pretty much a transactional arrangement where they've got a problem. The problem is, I don't know how to use this technology, or I need to do something here, and there's a student there or anybody who'll help them with that. If the job gets done and that problem is sorted, that's what they consider something as being successful. And what I found doing the interviews was that sometimes, you know, these high-profile projects that we're very familiar with, actually when it came down to the ground, the lecturing staff involved in them weren't even aware that they were part of these big headline projects that we're so familiar with. And one of them said, I think the one you're asking me about is that we hired 2 students to assist us. Now, just to counter that with that student's experience of that partnership was completely transformative. And yet for that lecturer, this was just somebody else, another member of their paid staff helping them out. So really interesting. So they do also share this idea of, you know, they acknowledge the importance of bringing students in to bring that student perspective in the same way that learning technologists, academic developers do. And they do have some moments of connection that slightly point towards those issues of, or those things to do with equality, where, so one member of academic staff saw that a student in a session that was being run was feeling quite overwhelmed and said to him, we're all in the same boat. You know, we've all been there, you know, we're all in that, face those challenges, and there's that kind of sense of it, trying to develop that sense of equality. But overall, perhaps some food for thought there, really. So within these projects then, what I found, perhaps reported on previously really, is that these projects don't really have a massive impact on the use of technology, although they do have a very important role perhaps in raising awareness of technology use amongst the participants. Did I miss that? No, I haven't. Okay. And one thing I wanted to also highlight was that the routine when people talk about technology, they quite often are still talking about very much students coming into this partnership with a good use of technology. They're still coming from the perspective that students possibly are more that digital native, that they should be familiar with technology, that they should have loads of brilliant ideas about how to use technology. And it's almost always countered by a kind of, quite often they say, well, I know I'm not sort of supposed to say that anymore. It's like, yeah, this discourse around that has moved on in a way, but actually what we find is that still is the entry point for allowing these schemes to actually take place. And even though they sort of backtrack and actually say, well, actually students weren't as good, or students didn't do exactly what I was thinking they were going to do, this still leaves kind of space for students to become involved in these projects, which I think is, you know, it's kind of interesting, so that we've moved on from that, from talking perhaps about that, but still there's a kind of ghost of that in the machine. So, just to highlight then some quick points. So this natives, immigrants trope still exists, and it's still active, even though nobody actually talks about it directly. Because the official narrative of kind of partnership is around equality, and it's around dialogue, and a bit about this idea of mentoring as being a sort of a bit of a role model. It's also important to realise that actually where some people are talking about partnership, but there are still partners who are not talking about partnership. They don't have a narrative around partnership and technology at all. And I just want to highlight some preliminary results, which would suggest that kind of drawing this together, that this lecturers and or learning technologists working in partnership with students, offer the greatest potential for partnership working, especially if students are able to choose from their own ideas or adapt them and learn to communicate them well. And it's perhaps supporting the key issue, supporting that element of choice, and also those issues to do with communication, because it's the communication that supports the dialogue that brings about the flowering of that partnership. But really the emphasis is on dramatically different experiences of partnership across these projects. Even in projects which we will be familiar with, that are branded successful, this isn't something that is, experienced by all of those partners. And perhaps when we're talking about partnership is to go back to that kind of original idea when we're talking about those transformations, those transformational shifts in our relationships, which will then hopefully go on and change the, our institutional settings around learning. That's what we've got to kind of keep in the backs of our minds. So closing thoughts really is, for those of you involved in partnership working, is to think about communicating the idea of partnership. Are you, when you're thinking about partnership, are you thinking about the partnership, or are you just thinking about how to deliver a particular service? Do all participants understand what partnership is, what their role in that is? And also a point of reflection, really, in terms of thinking about your desire to engage with students and why you want to get involved in partnership projects. Is that enough? Is that transformational enough? Do we need to rephrase those desires in something which suggests more of a transformation that will really begin to kind of change the way that we talk about partnerships and technology? And that is it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, any questions? I've actually got a question to ask.
Right.
Before we go into that. I wasn't too sure, was it whole institution projects you mentioned? You interviewed some lecturers, you mentioned some papers that you looked at, or was it particular schools that were involved in these projects?
So it would be the particular initiatives within universities. So it would be based in one particular service, and they'd be running them either as some students might be volunteers, or some schemes they might be paid, but they'd be organised in that way. So.
Okay, that makes sense. I've got a question on Me Too that asks, so it's a two-part question. Did you look at students' perceptions on dissemination of findings and experiences? If so, did you find that they regarded it as part of their responsibility towards the partnership or outside of their comfort zone?
Ooh, interesting question. I didn't touch on this because it's a really, really big thing. Students' role in partnership, in the dissemination events, particularly students coming along to events like this, was, I would say, part of that transformatory experience from their perspective. The reason I didn't really talk about it, because it's like, I haven't worked out yet, is that to do with partnership? I'm also interested in students as partners work, but it's being what's being termed around performance, students performing partnership. So one of the key areas that people are interested in is doing exactly that, bringing students along to conferences, and they sit on panels and they talk about their experiences. How does that relate to partnership, and how does it relate to the other things that we get them to do in these partnership projects, like appear in videos?
Were any of these partnerships particularly strong? I know you mentioned the ones with students and learning technologists or with the academics and things like that. I know the academics have a way to go in terms of realizing their own transformation, but were there ones that were particularly strong in your opinion?
I think the stronger ones are exactly those where students are able to exercise a lot of control. It's difficult to... so they exercise control, they work over several different projects, and so they are able to use their experiences to then feed into the next project. So there's also sort of duration, because the less successful ones were basically where students were told to come along and do this at this particular session, and they'll come along and demonstrate a piece of technology and then move. That's fine. Some people's experiences were positive, others less, but in terms of partnership, it's quite low down on that ladder.
Any more questions? No? Right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Fiona.
Thanks.